Working in the lab back in the day, it became apparent to me that there were very different personality traits that sometimes you just don't mesh well with concerning another person. I, for one, would like to think I was an absolute Chad who was very social to my fellow scientists, but there was always a few that our personalities did not go together. Kind of like water and oil. I'd like to say there was no bickering, resource guarding, or snide comments made, like because of the 8th time I was listening to Born in the USA while I ran my experiments in the lab, but there was. But at the end of the day, I could go home and get away from said people. After all, there was a whole habitable planet out there just waiting for me to start a YouTube channel to tell you about these exact instances. But what if there was no escape? What if someone in the freaky movie named Kim, which reminds me strikingly of a unnamed fellow microbiologist, and I mean that in the worst possible way, was stuck in a small outpost with you with no escape? And all the while, a recently discovered microbe on Mars was altering the biochemistry of humans forcibly to become something violent and able to withstand the surface. If you said walk out there without your helmet on, yes, I'd have to agree. In the not so distant future, man has done it. The moon was cool and all, but you know what would be more cool? Walking on a planet. A group of astronauts were sent out from several different countries on a joint mission to explore Mars and map it out for future missions, and if they can, discover any evidence of ancient life. Every person from every country was gunning for that glory, but upon finding it, things go sideways pretty quick. This form of life is fast adapting, likely given what happened to Mars, and is invasive as well, clearly not hailing from Earth, but being a Mars homegrown classic. So in today's episode, let's discuss the invasive virulent bacterial species discovered on Mars, and also discuss its pathophysiology in the human body. And as a bonus, because it's fun, hypothesize why it ended up the way it actually did. Also, I'm sorry if I sound weird. I just got done dealing with a virus myself that kicked me in the crotch for the last 96 hours, which was just an absolute chef's kiss of an experience. In fact, I have a sore throat and talking kind of hurts, but I'm on that YouTube grind. So hopefully this gives me a baritone voice and not just a congested one. I can't tell. My eustachian tubes are clogged and everything sounds like a heavy muffle. God, I love sinuses. So we kick off our story looking at Mars, except it really is Earth, but don't worry about that. Actually, if I remember correctly, over the last few years, they've been training astronauts in the southwest of the United States to get them ready for what they may see on the planet and what's going to feel like. Cold, dry, and barren. Given current events popping off right now, though, well, that may have been a waste of time if we nuke ourselves into oblivion like a bunch of idiots. Anyhow, crap on the horizon aside, I actually wanted to be the first man on Mars, fun fact, but so did a lot of people, and considering how long it's taken, who knows, maybe after I scoop my master's in like virology and epidemiology, I could pull it off when the aliens come to study what happened to us as I emerge from a cave. No, I would like to think Noble 6 style, but it's probably just gonna be Neanderthal style, and then steal a ship, only to crash it seconds later. A beautiful process. As they drive along, they approach a dust storm, which seems really scary, but is actually quite hilarious if you know how thin Mars's atmosphere really is. Dust storms on Mars may seem powerful, but because of said atmospherical issues, if I remember correctly, it would have difficulty moving something like a balloon filled with oxygen under the same conditions. They discuss how this is surely not going to be good for the economy or Kim's dig site. And all right, I'm going to level with you. I hate Kim. It just is what it is. So there's going to be a lot of Kim sarcasm and even some Kim slander is Kim possible. Heading out to the dig site, Kim can see the storm approaching in the distance, and the same can be seen at the outpost. It's quite literally their last day on Mars. They've been out here for 6 months and are supposed to be going home in around 19 hours. Vince calls out to Aldrich, which she just kind of sort of ignores him. And you're going to see this throughout this whole movie. People just do not answer their radios. It's actually kind of annoying. But Kim here is upsetty spaghetti because they haven't found anything. So that means you just treat your team like absolute crap because of it. Yes, very good. You see, that's a good way to get people to not care about your plight and definitely just not really care about locking you in a room with monsters. Also, let's say there's just no monsters. It's not like you don't have like an 8-month trip back to Earth. It's like getting in an elevator with several other people heading to the top floor and immediately cutting a fart as soon as the doors close. You're stuck in there with them. Vince tells her to wrap it up, but she tells him to F off. Okay then. She gets in complaining about how they haven't accomplished anything except for learning about the composition of the planet, how to live on it more permanently, as 6 months is no small feat. What are the effects of Mars' lower gravity on a body, if any? And proof of concept to pave the way for colonies. You know, they haven't done anything. Personal glory. So you could be the first group on Mars, but if a subsequent group though finds something after you leave, like life for instance, you will be overshadowed. But the question is, have you considered getting over it, you big baby? Back at the outpost, everyone is just chilling in the dark as the crew then talks about heading home. As one man looks into a microscope, he looks quite jazzed, in fact attracting the attention of another astronaut asking him what he's so happy about. Meanwhile, Vince, Rebecca, and the monster they found on the surface are headed back to the outpost. Marco approaches Brunel and says that he needs to go back out again. Brunel eventually relents and then lets him go, much to the dismay of Kim, who's upset that she can't just go back out there. See, everyone is in on it for their personal glory. It actually should have been Kim to go out there, I'm gonna be honest with you. We'll find out soon why. Also, we also see some form of PTSD in Vincent. Not really too sure what's going on, potentially a depressurization event that he suffered from. Marco now tells Harrington that he needs to pack up sample boxes as he found an MA1, or microscopic anomaly. Also, if you haven't worked in the science field, for some reason, I've always hated this. People really like to use acronyms for everything. And if you're a new person, you have to sit there and ask like, okay, what does that mean? Like, why not just say the word? So you don't have to sit there and waste your breath about, oh, well, what does that mean? But then again, I'm sitting here wasting my breath talking about video games and movies on the internet. So is it really that different? So as Vincent wraps up his repairs, they enter the briefing room where he sees Kim absolutely reeing in the background. She enters the room angrily and starts being sarcastic to the rest of the crew. My lord, I'm having flashbacks to this specific scientist I work with. No idea if she watches the channel, highly doubtful, but all I can say is pain. Kim then jumps on Marco's station and begins checking what he was looking at. It's a bold strategy, Cotton, to check on a man's computer who's been stuck on a planet for 6 months after an 8-month trip over. I tell you what. As she looks, she discovers that he was looking at life, and not to be confused with life-making actions. He was specifically observing bacterial cell division. The crew now discusses what they should do. Brunel calls out to Harrington and declares the site off limits, but nobody's really listening. Marco continues looking at the sample and he thinks it's beautiful. Does this man have like microscope eyes? As he stands up, he falls through the crust to the ground, which is quite deep apparently. As the next rover approaches, we actually see there are gases escaping along with water vapor, which is very interesting, and that's actually a theory. So to understand how life appears to be underground on Mars, we need to know what exactly happened to the planet in the first place. Mars, as we know now, is a dry, vast desert of a planet with an extremely thin atmosphere. Yet we find evidence of a long since evaporated rivers, canals, and even oceans left on the surface, which is a little sad if you think about it, because if we had a planet that at one point in time would have been habitable for humans, like think if we had 2 planets in our solar system that could support life, we would have been trying to make that jump like forever ago with way more concerted effort than we have. But actually, if you think it was only 2, think again, nerd, because there may have been 3 habitable planets. Venus is suspected that before the volcanoes erupted, causing a pressure cooker situation, that it may have also been a planet that had water as well. Granted, it would be like way warmer, like the whole thing would be tropical essentially, and the sun then aged and Venus like own planetary processes continued, and this eventually rendered it the hottest planet in the solar system. Also, even more fun fact, Titan is essentially considered to be a primordial Earth, and that when the sun enters its red giant phase, potentially for a very brief moment in time, it may be habitable. But back to Mars. Mars once upon a time appears to have had water. While being cooler than Earth, it appears as though it did have a weak magnetic field of some sorts that protected the atmosphere from the ionizing radiation of the sun, as well as the sun's coronal mass ejections that would strip away the planet's atmosphere, who does not have a magnetic field. It is hypothesized that around 700 million years ago or so, this allowed for water to flow on its surface, which if it truly did last as long as it seems to have, this may have given conditions similar to ancient Earth that allowed for life to spring up. But don't be fooled, humanity really has no clue where life came from. There are theories like the primordial soup and essentially hydrothermal vents releasing organic chemicals which formed amino acids, and then lightning struck the water, which then created like the first DNA chain, which then created cells. But there are other beliefs that God created life. It's all a process and really just depends on what you believe at this point. But as Mars continued to orbit the sun, something was happening in its core. Unlike Earth, Mars does not have the same core composition that we do. While it does have some iron in its core, Earth has considerably more, and the spinning of that iron is hypothesized to give Earth its magnetic field. For a while, when Mars was essentially new, it had a similar ability, but over time, eventually the iron would separate out from the other minerals in its core, and boom, the magnetic field got weaker. And as it got weaker, with each solar storm, the planet's atmosphere was protected less and less. Now, it could have been a slow process, and probably was, but there's also an idea that it was a singular event, but we really aren't entirely sure. But the atmosphere was stripped away, which boiled the water on the planet to replace the lost atmosphere. As this happened, that was stripped away as well, which left the planet desiccated and bone dry. We actually find portions of its magnetic field still in the southern hemisphere today that are still somewhat operational, indicating that it used to, in fact, have a global magnetosphere. This event is what left Mars the way it is today, or at least that is why it is hypothesized to have become how it is. But moving on, Dalby wants to go down there and get Marco, but Brunel declares him the first body on Mars. Harrington says that she wants to stay there, as Dalby says, no, I'll stay there, because apparently, according to her, Harrington did enough, implying that he didn't do enough, like not stopping the crust of a planet from falling away. I mean, geez, Harrington, did you even try to stop a completely unpredictable event that you had no way reacting to or even stopping in time? And even if you did, what were you supposed to do? It's because he's British, isn't it? Also, Kim is British too. Something to be aware of. Coincidence? I don't think so. Also, at this point, Kim says, oh, well, mate, you broke protocol. It's Tuesday, isn't it? And that's why Marco got busted in his gabber, I swear on me mum. Or something like that. Basically, she says Marco deserved it because he got to leave. Seriously, I hate you, Kim. So then a fight breaks out as Kim keeps talking, saying, well, I didn't break the rules, I'll vote for him. And Mission Control says that they need to retrieve the body of Marco at this point, point and potentially put a few words together. While that's going on, Dalby approaches the crust hole, probably could have found a better way to say that, and then shines her flashlight down into it. It looks steamy in there, and you may be curious as to why. Well, with the knowledge that we have now about potentially what happened to Mars, don't forget, much like Earth, Mars would have had groundwater as well, and this is what is currently interesting to our species now. With an atmosphere evaporating quickly and the planet cooling, this would lock in a layer of permafrost, trapping the water underneath the actual surface of the planet. With this layer of permafrost, remember that this could also essentially trap even more liquid water underneath that because it kind of forms a roof. It is thought that potentially if we could somehow restabilize Mars' magnetic field first and unlock this water, the oceans would be returned somewhat back to Mars. I mean, obviously a lot of water has been lost, but some is still there. Now, the key is to restabilize the magnetosphere, and without that, we could spend generations rebuilding the atmosphere first just to have it ripped away by a solar flare. The other thing to remember is that Mars's core is still molten, which means there still is geothermal heat coming out of there. With the crust producing a sort of ceiling containing this moisture and heat, this would produce a microclimate for anything living below. Now, this would seemingly cause some issues for any life living in there when Marco fell in, however, which may be explained by what we just saw. Going back to his lab station, the cells that we saw were in the middle of mitosis and were stopped, likely due to exposure to the atmosphere or the lack of atmosphere. This ended up taking out these cells because the change in the environment became too great. But even if it was just slightly more gradual, it seems the bacteria is able to adapt and overcome. Dalby, looking down, begins panting for some reason. I'm assuming morning is getting to her. She's then told that they are headed back, and then she hears the airlock open. She goes to check the doors and realizes somebody is coming in. Her radio then goes silent at this point, which is pretty par for the course for everybody's radio. And so I have to ask, there's just no locks on these things? Brilliant. Remember, our space tech is built by the lowest bidder. They check the rover too and then don't see anything, and they suspect maybe she fell into the hole, so they go to check. They discuss who should go down as Vince is the first to head in, followed by Brunel. Moving down, the web-like material is all over the place. Something is growing on the rock formations, so they head lower to try to find Marco as Vince starts having like more freakouts for a second, and then they bring him up. He says he's okay, but maybe stop sending the guy with panic disorders to check out the creepy new section of the planet. They then see two sets of prints headed back towards base, but they didn't take the rover. They alert Kim as she keeps going through the list of symptoms that they must have. She tries to apologize to Harrington as he just blows her off. Yeah, it turns out you can't just say whatever you want to anyone at any time, then go, sorry, like some sort of BP executive, and it's all good. But then they spot someone approaching the outpost, and things are finally about to kick off. Mark's helmet is broken in his face shield, as then he falls into the outpost. Taking his helmet off, well, his face is completely gray and desiccated. Now, you may be led to believe that was because of the exposure to Mars's atmosphere that did this. However, it is not. Desiccation at this level takes quite a bit of time, even in a very arid environment, and humidity can really only go down to 0%. The lack of atmosphere would cause these fluids in his body to kind of begin immediately boiling, but the skin actually serves as a relatively good barrier to prevent fluid loss. In the time that he was out there, this level of fluid loss is exponentially higher than it would actually be, and we will learn here soon enough how this process works. He grabs the drill and screeches at Harrington, stabbing him in the stomach. Kim then enters the room as Marco screeches at her, and Dalby spots her and gives chase. Harrington locks Marco in the room, but Kim has led her to the other side of the locked door and calls out Mayday into the radio. Also, I'm not sure if I've called Marco Mario several times or not, but it's totally possible. Harrington then passes out from his injury as Kim keeps fighting Dalby. She breaks open a glass container, which has water in it, as Marco goes to drink it, seemingly obsessed with water, and this kind of indicates the hypothalamus is being impacted greatly. But we have to ask ourselves, as this is a biology-based channel, why is the hypothalamus not doing so great? It seems that this variant of life that Marco is infected with is altering his body in several ways. Again, Mars's lack of atmosphere would not have dried that body to beef jerky status that quickly. Because of the knowledge that we have to assume the native life that he's infected with is actively sapping the body of all moisture. We will see later that craving water is one of the first signs of infection. As the osmoreceptors in the brain begin picking up that the blood is becoming more viscous, it would stimulate the hypothalamus to increase the sensation of thirst. It would also tell the kidneys to stop secreting water as well. And this indicates that the circulatory system is likely the most sought after point by the bacteria due to the moisture housed within. And secondarily, the intracellular matrix, which inspires the first symptoms that we see, again being dehydration and things like sunken eyes. Eventually, as it spreads faster, seeing as the bacterial growth is inhibited by how much water is available, it begins to clot blood all over the body, sapping all water in the area, which will then present as darkened veins. From here, the disease will progress further into completely changing the behavior of the individual as their skin continues to also be sucked dry, with cells being actively attacked for their fluid that they possess as well. Essentially, this microbe is absolutely lost in the sauce when it comes to high quality H2O. So Brunel finally gets in and finds an infected Marco and approaches him. He tries to reason with them, but Marco has checked out. With the presentation on the outside, we can assume that internally the same thing is happening. And this is why I believe the cells are also attacked, as made mention, because this is a virulent bacteria. Along with all of the other internal organs, the Martian bacteria would actually attack the cells of the brain as well, and likely begin lysing some of them for the fluid contained within, thus fueling its own growth. Brunel gets the door closed. As Kim says, they must be dead, but they still must have brain function as well. Very true, but it just seems like a high degree of cerebral damage, specifically the frontal lobe, which, why is that? Well, let's get into it. Again, you have to ask yourself, if the neurons of the brain are being lysed, how does the bacteria discriminate between important ones to keep your body moving versus the ones that only make us think? It appears to me that there is more happening than just purely lysing the cell. Some cells seem to be taken over, and it appears to be proximity to the wound. Sort of like the lower of your brain. I mean, if you get like bit on the shoulder or something, the lower part of your brain is closer to that than the upper part of your brain. Though the interaction with human eukaryotic cells and this invasive Martian bacteria, there appears like there's an event happening that could be similar to how prokaryotes obtained the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, of course, a long time ago, according to the theory of evolution. Essentially, a cell was going to eat another cell, but found it was overproducing energy, so instead of breaking it down, it kept it alive to produce ATP for itself. This engulfing but not destroying of another cell was beneficial for both involved. Now, with this interaction between Earth and Martian cells, the process is more aggressive in the other direction. Instead of the one cell engulfing another and keeping it, one cell gains forcible entry into another cell through virulent attributes and is now housed within its favorite place, moisture. As this happens, it may be completely random, but some brain tissue will be spared, however incredibly altered. This mechanism by which it is spared is likely along the same line as like MHCs or major histocompatibility complexes on the surface of a cell. When the Martian bacteria invades the cell that could be chosen at random, or it could be in relation to where the infection began, it puts these markers on the surface of the cell it has infected, which in turn makes it recognized by other Martian bacterial cells as conquered, essentially, so that it's not attacked. And this would allow for the body to remain operational and likely completely alters the metabolism of the cell, as we will see. This also explains the decreased mental capacity and husk of a human form, as half of the body is essentially destroyed or at least run threadbare, which is amazing how strong these things are, considering random conglomeration of living cells have been taken out while others are just, still left, I suppose. But at this point, well, everything appears to be going swimmingly, as you can tell. As they look in, they can see the infected as Kim continues yelling that it's not them anymore. They move to the hydroponic dome, where at least it's somewhat safe, and then seal the door. They place Brunel down on the table alien style as he's not looking so hot, mainly because his immune system isn't reacting to the infection yet. They check his collarbone and it looks exposed, which, ouchies, and Kim remarks how there should be more blood, but there isn't. Extreme dehydration seems to have set in as the bacteria saps the blood of all of its moisture. He asks for water as he's thirsty as Kim backs away. So you may be curious as to why the body isn't reacting. Well, therein lies the issue, actually. See, the problem with viscous blood is it's not only exceedingly difficult for the body to properly communicate that it's under attack, but it's even more difficult for your innate immune system to reach the area that it needs to get to. So like imagine this. You have like a long hallway about 12 feet wide. There are people scattered randomly throughout and you can still move past them. Now you have someone who just robbed a bank running from the cops behind them. As they move past people, the cops do as well. The robber isn't as physically fit as the cops as they gain on him and then grab him. And this is normal bacteria if it gets into your body. The immune system can navigate the hallway pretty well. But with the Martian bacteria, as the robber runs, for some reason, people keep entering the hallway behind him. As the cops get further and further behind him, they're having difficulty getting past everyone, and eventually the robber just gets away as even more people enter the hallway. It becomes gridlock, and the cops really have no chance of grabbing the robber. This example works in a sense that when moisture is removed, the cells tend to clump together as the plasma becomes more viscous and the blood vessels constrict. And this makes it exceedingly difficult for the innate immune system to actually get to the virulent bacteria in time to do anything, because it starts sucking away the moisture and all cells near it tend to clump, which present a physical barrier to the immune system and the invader's destruction. Giving him water, dude is absolutely fiending for it as he starts choking the guy who gave him water. Vince then holds him down as Brunel appears to be succumbing to his infection as he whispers he will never see home and how he can't remember his offspring. To me, this is the greatest indicator that some of the neuronal tissue is spared while others are lysed for their fluids. The breaking patterns in brain would result in memory loss like dementia the longer it went on. They then check his pulse and he has nothing. This is also the first indicator of a complete metabolic shift within the infected. Kim then straps him to the table as they cover his body as everyone starts panicking for a little bit. They pull the cover back off and see that his blood vessels are blackened from the massive coagulation of all blood all over his body. They then hear an explosion as Marco and Dolby have been released, which is interesting as this does imply there is still a considerable amount of brain function, it's just completely altered. The infected now have also showed up to the hydrodome as Brunel's body starts convulsing on the table. Vince comes up with a plan and descends into the ground to move between the outpost area. Rebecca then grabs a sample from Brunel's wound as they put it under a microscope. Brunel has a blood infection with the Martian bacteria. And this again isn't very odd, but what is odd is as he starts convulsing on the table, you have to remember that his heart has actually stopped. So what does that mean exactly? Well, let's discuss metabolisms for a moment. Aren't you glad you're here? Humans, as we all know, are oxygen-dependent organisms. We like to think the veil between life and death for us is pretty thick, but actually it isn't. It's actually so hilariously thin that death is winking at us on the other side all the time. Around 2 minutes without oxygen for the average person results in unconsciousness. 6 minutes without oxygen results in brain damage beginning to build up. 10 minutes without oxygen and the brain has officially died, and there's no point in reviving someone unless they fall into cold water and are frozen outside. Because remember, you aren't dead until you're warm and dead. Even though our brains only constitute around 2% of our total body mass, on average, it will consume around 20% of the oxygen of the body, which is pretty wild, but necessary for how important the brain is according to the brain. With Brunel on the table convulsing, this was his brain death, or at least partially. Some of the brain had become so damaged to the point that it was beginning to send its last signals to the body, but some are still clearly alive, as we will see. With this loss of control, the portion that was still alive was no longer oxygen dependent, which does make sense. And this could mean several things, but what do I think it means? I think this Martian bacteria is not an O2-based organism, but instead is an H2O-based organism. The methods are unknown, but it may be entirely possible that much like how the mitochondria uses oxygen to create fuel, the Martian bacteria, being more reliant on water for its metabolism instead of O2, would allow for it to exist in Mars's atmosphere and keep human cells supplied with ATP even in the absence of oxygen. Maybe that bacteria breaks down H2O and then forms O2, or it may just be that the bacteria is able to produce ATP with H2O. And this would make the most sense to keeping the human cells going, suggesting a completely different but viable process. This is why those who are infected can immediately go outside in the non-existent atmosphere of Mars without suffocating. Because also remember that Mars's atmosphere is very, very thin amount, but still is carbon dioxide, which means they could still be pulling carbon from the atmosphere. Also, correction, it was near non-existent, not non-existent. This is also why they fiend for water so hard. I mean, if an alien used water for its metabolism and I kept finding pockets of oxygen to breathe while underwater, I too would probably be acting like that to get a breath by any means necessary. This indicates that Brunel's cells are being kept alive by the reservoir of water within his own body, although it is being rapidly burned through. However, he is still technically alive, even with a non-beating heart, although the brain damage would be extensive, and it does appear as though the bacteria has massive behavioral impacts on a person, turning them aggressive regardless of the familiarity in their non-infected form. So Vince now has another panic attack over something that won't really be explained, but I'm here to explain it. He got caught in an airlock and it depressurized. Thanks for watching. That was the big mystery this whole movie. Rebecca then calls out to Vince and reminds him that, don't worry, we're all losing it. It's not just you, which calms him down, which, I don't know, that might be a little more alarming, I think. He then recovers and moves through the other outpost area, finding blood all over the walls. Rebecca suggests that if it's a bacteria, they do have antibiotics, why not use those? I mean, it's an admirable idea, but there are several issues, unfortunately. First, antibiotics work on Earth-based bacteria because of these structures and processes that can be disrupted. When a bacteria comes into contact with an antibiotic such as penicillin, for instance, the cell wall is disrupted, which results in the destruction of the bacteria. Others will halt internal metabolisms, and that also destroys that bacteria. But even on Earth, we have alarmingly seen life adapts to this. Like, no joke, if we are not careful, eventually our antibiotics will no longer have an effect on bacterial infections. And this isn't just like, oh yeah, that's like 500 years in the future. This is actually, oh crap, I'm 60 now and we have no way to counter the splinter, and I got exposed to the super mega ultra instinct gonorrhea. Now, I could complain about this for a long time, and I will. Well, for a minute anyhow. Old doctors who prescribed antibiotics for everything have contributed to this. But the other side of that is people not finishing their courses of antibiotics, and the absolutely most brain dead idea humanity has had in a while, putting antibiotics in common hand soap. Why do we need antibiotics in common hand soap? The base in the soap kills the bacteria anyways. Sending antibiotics down the sink into the sewer system just makes the bacteria stronger, which is then leaking out onto the surface. Seriously, there are not a lot of things that I think should be banned in the world, but that has got to be the most corporate, oh, well, it gives people the warm and fuzzies, but really, it's gonna screw all of us idea I have ever seen. Like, it makes sense to have them at hospitals, but for everyone else, it makes zero sense and just accelerates the issue further. It's absolutely maddening. Don't buy antibiotic hand soap. What was I talking about? Okay, yeah, the Martian bacteria. So the idea in theory could work. Some antibiotics may be able to work, as there seems to be at least a marginal compatibility between Earth life and Martian life. And if there's a compatibility, that means typically there's an exploitable weakness to disrupt that compatibility. But the odds are not good that they will work. And even further to that point, as we will come to find out, the genetic mutations in this bacteria and what it can undergo makes it extremely adaptable. So they decide to atomize it and release it into the outpost to clear the infection, but first test it on Brunel. Meanwhile, Vince is over at Party Central moving through virtually pitch black rooms, finding evidence of someone bleeding all over. Taking a sample of Brunel's blood, they add the antibiotic and it appears to be reacting to it, and not in a good way. Well, not in a good way is like it's actually working. So what exactly does that mean for this organism? Again, it goes back to the compatibility. While it is able to destroy the free-roaming bacteria in the blood, this may not have the desired effect on the ones already in the human cells, meaning it can clear the infection only temporarily, but much like how cells can actually serve as a virus reservoir, which releases more viruses later, it appears the Martian bacteria can do the same. So they inject Brunel, who has no pulse, as he starts convulsing and moving, and then appears to flatline out on the table. Well, brainwave flatline. His heart was already done. They check his blood, and the bacteria is showing no signs of motility. It appears the structures associated with its own movement then are similar to like Earth movement mechanisms, and this hints at an oceanic evolutionary past. Well, that along with its own metabolism, and as that's happening, Vince is able to get in contact with the Aurora. He informs them that there is an emergency before the link loses power again. They then see the creatures are leaving as they lure them back into the airlock. Looking at the bacteria again, they discover that already the bacteria is developing a resistance to the antibiotic, which indicates the genome is highly adaptable and prone to mutations, which is not like anything Earth-based. So how might this happen? I'm glad you asked. Now we all know Mars got screwed, like hardcore. The only thing that could have survived that is some of the most adaptable extremophile single-celled life possible, like the green beret of bacteria. All other life would have easily passed and been lost to time. It's clear to me that when Mars became more and more inhospitable, it was a slower event, but pretty rapid. And in this way, extremophiles could adapt and would have adapted and taken on more traits that would have become more extreme as time went on until finally an equilibrium of sorts was reached. The equilibrium with the environment would have been living in a frozen soil. But there was a limiter, and this was that the water was frozen. It may be that the bacteria in frigid environments, with only frozen water around it, is much slower, which makes sense as if it's a water-based metabolism, then its own metabolism would be slower as well due to lower energy in the environment. However, the planet isn't completely dead. There are still geological events in the core, and it's still molten. Every once in a while, some area of the planet may heat up and be warmer, which caused the whole issue in the first place. Marco falling through the crust was incredibly unlucky, but can be explained by geothermal activity. As the permafrost melted, it created liquid water in a cavern. The bacteria began to grow rapidly as the metabolism was sped up by the water suddenly becoming liquid again and energy being added to the system. This means that all traits that helped it survive the sterilization of Mars to begin with were still there. Upon coming into contact with humans, the bacteria continued to do what it always did and rapidly divided. And this is where the concept of adaptation comes into play. With multicellular animals, adaptations can take millions of years. With single-celled organisms, it could take decades, which is what we were seeing with the antibiotic crisis. But at the rate this bacterial organism on Mars divides, generations seem to pass in mere seconds, meaning that within hours, adaptations can sprout seemingly out of nowhere as generations rise and fall within minutes, making a version of bacteria that is now capable of withstanding the new environment. And this is how it is able to survive and deal with the lack of atmosphere. Somehow this trait of rapidly dividing, far outclassing any Earth-based organism in speed, allows for permutations of the same species to exist and then just see who's the most successful in a short span. And this also could make them appear as different species. But once a successful variant begins thriving, that becomes the dominant form of bacteria, but it's still the same water-based metabolism from what we can tell. As Vince moves through the other outpost area, he spots another infected who immediately begins attacking him. Vince reminds Harrington why we won the Revolutionary War on Earth and why we will win on Mars, as then he runs back to the Hydrodome and enters, which then depressurizes the whole room. They throw something at him, antibiotics maybe, as the infected starts freaking out, and in the ensuing attack, Kim hilariously gets locked in the room with the infected, and nothing of value was lost. Like the movie tried to make it sad, but of anyone this could have happened to, she deserves it the most. Like there was no character arc for her. She was just a douche canoe pretty much the whole time. Like it kind of reminded me of Abby from The Last of Us Part 2. After what happened with Joel, there's no redemption arc or humanizing. I just didn't like her. Same with Kim. There was no humanizing or redeeming character arc. It was like, oh no. Anyways, so the non-infected crew gets the rover. Vince asks Irwin for the O2 levels before giving Rebecca an antibiotic shot to give her body at least a chance to fight the disease. Which you might think that's impossible, but I'm here to tell you that your body is perfectly adapted to fight anything, anywhere, at any time, on sight. The immune system is an absolute chad, but let's discuss how. The immune system, if the adaptive immune system that is, can get involved, can pretty much handle anything as long as the lines of communication aren't interrupted somehow. This is how things like HIV, for instance, can overwhelm the body because they attack key immune cells which disrupt function. What it comes down to is making an antibody. An antibody, upon attaching to a cell, can disable it and prevent it from effectively moving through the body. How this process of creating an antibody works is that during an initial conflict, the innate immune system will destroy one of the invaders. Well, several, but you get the idea. Upon Upon doing so, the dendritic cell will come up and scoop up a piece of the invader and bring it back to B cells located in the lymphatic tissue and the spleen. Here it will move around trying to figure out which B cell recognizes it. Why would a B cell recognize a piece of Martian bacteria? Because the configurations by which the B cells recognize antigens is completely random. It's more physics-based, but every configuration possible anywhere is created, which means you actually have the ability to fight the fictional infection such as Tarkat from Mortal Kombat. It's literally in you to resist that. But upon recognizing this antigen, it will then replicate itself and release a ton of antibodies, which then begin to overwhelm the bacteria, allowing for cells to be immobilized and scooped up by macrophages. But you might be saying, but Roanoke, how do we know that there's even a receptor on them? It's an alien bacteria. Because this sounds lame, but they have to. Like, this isn't even tongue-in-cheek. For a species to interact with one another on a single-celled level, there has to be some form of communication and identification. If they were just smooth as an egg, the species would attack itself, and this same recognition on the surface is its downfall. And considering it's virulent, unless it's spearing cells, which we really don't know if it is, it doesn't appear to be, then it must be interacting with the surface of cells somehow. And this is how the human immune system can exploit that. By stopping the bacteria in the bloodstream, the hope is the immune system can actually find the pieces and start the process of producing antibodies. The problem, however, is that the body takes around 2 to 3 days to actually do this. The bacteria just adapts too fast and can overwhelm the body by sapping all of its moisture. Then there's the issue of the bacteria in the human cell, and this would require NKT or natural killer T cells to get involved and destroy them. Essentially, this whole process would be a knockdown, drag-out fight for your body, even using everything that humans have, as well as the natural processes of the body. Irwin comes in and tells them that they don't have enough power to make it to the landing site. They discuss what they should do, which Vince says that they should go back and hold them off. Rebecca asks if Irwin is infected too, because, he got grabbed, as then they just head to Site 9 to get the fully charged rover. These rover batteries are complete crap, apparently. But approaching Site 9, Vince suits up as Irwin says he will go instead. Not seeing any reason not to trust him, he then heads out with his flashlight towards the destroyed remnants of Site 9. As Irwin enters the rover, he won't answer his radio for a second, until finally he does and talks about how Rebecca is infected and he needs to join him in the rover. Vincent says, no, I'd rather stay with the infected Rebecca, as he gets ready to leave the rover. Also, Irwin is infected as well, spoiler alert. Vincent then runs over to the rover as the infected begins showing up at that rover. Rolling out like a gaggle of Autobots, they give chase as Rebecca's leg ain't looking so great. They discuss how the ship is landing in about 8 hours. The sun will come up and then they can charge the rover for an hour, which should get them to the landing site. Vince suggests maybe we should just run over the infected until they can't get up again. USA, baby. Rebecca starts showing signs that she's not doing so well by asking for the water and drinking the whole thing, indicating that despite the injection, the bacteria is already beginning to build back up in her bloodstream through subsequent generations developing resistances. Rebecca keeps thinking that Brunel was fighting the infection, but he was trapped in his body, which I say doubtful. I'm pretty sure most of him was gone at that point. As the sun rises, the ship is then sent in to the landing site to pick the crew up. The rover begins to get charged as Vince wakes up and calls out to Rebecca. Of course, nobody answers, so then he calls out to the Aurora lander, where the rescue team is, but they don't answer either because, again, nobody's going to answer their radio. He checks on Rebecca and sees that she is gone as he follows her tracks out to the vast plains. Calling out to her, she barely answers him, saying that she can't stop the infection. The rover then dies because it's a piece of crap as Vince runs out to get her. She then takes off her helmet, which we see something really stupid. Like, she's gasping for air, right? Which I get, I would too. And rather than just put her helmet back on, she succumbs in like 3 seconds. Like, bro, she's still alive. She's just unconscious. It's like that scene in Callisto Protocol. I know, retro, right? Man, was that game a dumpster fire. Where that one guy, like on the surface, who was helping the main character and he got his visor cracked, and like a second later after he passes out, the woman cracks into his spinal column. Like, bro, he is still alive. Just drag him to the ship and perform CPR for like half a second. He will very likely come back. But granted, Rebecca is infected, so maybe it's like marginally different. But because she's infected, the bacteria takes over as she twitches and immediately begins attacking him. He's able to fight her off as she starts saying, kill me? Oof, maybe she is in there. But at least early on, after probably like 10 minutes, I'm sure enough brain tissue would be destroyed that it really wouldn't matter. But he picks up a Mars rock and commits the first murder on Mars. Humanity. So now that that's done, the Aurora rescue ship lands not listening to anyone on the radio, and somehow Vince can't like get to them, but like they can't hear him, but he can hear them. It's very strange. And they're immediately attacked by the rest of the infected. Being overwhelmed in a matter of minutes, everyone has gotten got by the time Vince gets to the ship. He finds Marco absolutely desiccated beyond what he was earlier, which does show the body is actively being used in a metabolic process, and if not replaced, much like how oxygen is used, it will result in the end of that specific organism. We've all run the simulations. They're tough, but they ain't invincible. Getting on board the ship, he heads up to the pilot's area where he finds Erwin completely lost in the Martian sauce. He can't remember his daughter's names and says he can't feel anything. Vince says that they can't go back to Earth as they will infect the whole planet. They get into a nice fight as Erwin then goes to stab Vince, but his helmet stops it just before it becomes a major issue. Erwin takes off as they fight over the controls, and then Vince just like headbutts Erwin into oblivion as they reach orbit. So Vince has a nice exposure event as he gets blood on his helmet and it's everywhere on the ship, meaning, well, the whole ship's contaminated. Vince then blows Erwin out of the airlock as Vince has a flashback to Earth with its blue skies, along with visions of Rebecca. He closes the airlock and then injects himself with antibiotics, so we all know that's not going to work. Then he calls out to Mission Control, letting them know they're all boned. This virulent bacteria infected all of them, including himself, and the message will take around 15-ish minutes to get back to Earth. So if they return back to Mars, they need to lock and load Brides of Christ and treat the planet as if the entire thing is contaminated with something horrible, and thus concludes the last day on Mars. With the destruction of Mars, that left the most hardy and aggressive form of bacterial life, having a different form of metabolism than the Earth-based creatures. That may seem strange, but really there's nothing to say that Mars had an O2 atmosphere and water may have been preferable as an ATP generator. Because of this, in some ways it was compatible with humans who were reliant on waters, and in other ways it would alter the human cell to be reliant on water as well, as the body would then cannibalize its own water reserves, leaving it desiccated and leaving people pretty much mummified, seeking water as their own anatomical functions began to struggle. Ultimately, if you could find a way to immobilize the bacteria long enough, a few days maybe, the human immune system might be able to get it in check as long as the adaptive is given that time to produce antibodies, but it's also completely possible that the bacteria would just mutate and adapt to the antibodies. It's really hard to say. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. Hopefully I didn't sound like complete crap, and if I did, well, life finds a way. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like helps me personally get this video out there. Because I had to take a day off from my normal upload schedule, I'm sure YouTube will bury this video. And if you really like the content, consider subscribing as I upload twice weekly, as long as I'm not suffering from some mystery illness or haven't slipped slowly into madness in doing so. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel links in the description. As last week we have talked about the Altamaha River Cryptid, but speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronaut, Rosie Kinch. Thank you very much for your continued support. I'd also like to thank our astrophysicist, Death's Dancer, as well as our scientists, Chad the Enjoyer of Scientific Explanations of B-grade horror movies, Florian, Lacune, Logan Satome, and Lucian Dragon. And the rest of my patrons, your support is greatly appreciated, and I love you. That's the kind of parasocial relationship that built this great nation. But anyhow, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.